What's left out of that was any conception of the economy of gifts. That was seen to be something that had died with tribal societies. If you've read anthropology, you will know that the literature on gifts is central to anthropology, because it was one of the central mechanisms through which tribal societies bound themselves together, not just economically, but socially and imaginatively. That gift exchange was part of a ritual world in which it confirmed social bonds. But that was seen to be something that had died away. Actually, it hadn't. Throughout the industrial period, you'd had forms of mutuality, you'd had forms of collective activity, which were extremely powerful. And it's only now that we're beginning to see those gift relationships come back. So if you look at the literature on the internet, what you see is that it emphasizes the relationship between commerce and commodities on the one hand, and gift relations on the other. So on the one side you have attacks on the commercialization of the internet. On the other you have a passionate defense of the internet as a space of free exchange. What that account leaves out is any understanding of public goods. So what I want to suggest is that if we really want to understand what's going on and what the potentials are for organising it in the future, we need to keep all three of those moral economies in play. We can't reduce it to a binary opposition. There's a tendency, because we now live in a digital age, that everything only has two conditions. My own understanding now is that everything has at least three, and probably more. I can't follow string theory too well, but apparently there are 13 dimensions for most string theories. In social science, we're not as ambitious as that. But I came to understand why you have to have three instead of two when I was a child, actually, but I'd forgotten. I was sent to Sunday school by my parents, not because they were particularly devout, but because with a house full of screaming children, this was the only time they could actually be together. It took me until I was a teenager to realise actually what was in it for them. But I quite like Sunday school because we got these very big coloured stamps that you could stick in a book with martyred saints and gruesome pictures and so on. And but I was always worried. I couldn't really understand the doctrine of the Trinity. I could understand God the Father, big guy, beard, a bit grumpy. God the Son, nice guy, had a bad time, but it all came right. But what I couldn't understand was the Holy Ghost. What was the Holy Ghost? Where was it? What did it look like? I think there's always a Holy Ghost in every theoretical machine. Okay? And the Holy Ghost in political economy's machine has been the gift economy. That it's kind of there lurking, but it's shadowy, it's insubstantial. So I want to put it back and see where that takes us. But first of all, we need to understand the other two columns. Let me just say something about commodification. This is the young Karl Marx. Karl Marx was, among many other things, a great romantic. He wooed his wife, who was the mayor's daughter in Trier on the Moselle, by writing quite awful romantic poems, which have now been translated in his the first volume of his collected works consists of some really terrible poetry. But he was a great romantic. This book, The Poverty of Philosophy, was one of his early books. But it's remarkably prescient. It almost describes what's happened to us in the last 20 years as areas of life that had always been outside the market have suddenly got sucked in. He says, capitalism ushers in a time when the very things which till then had been communicated but never exchanged, given but never sold, acquired but never bought, virtue, love, conviction, knowledge, finally pass into commerce, where everything moral or physical is brought to the market. That is the central dynamic of all capitalist societies. It's not a moral judgment, it's a statement of empirical fact. In order to grow, capitalism has to colonize more and more areas of social life and to turn them into commodities that can be sold for a price in the market. In economics, as you know, a commodity is any good that is sold for a price. That's what capitalism does. That's how it organises things. However, if you look in the first volume of Das Kapital, Marx begins with a commodity, and he has this very interesting concept which he calls commodity fetishism. So commodification is not just a structural imperative. It's also a way of imagining yourself in the world. And he dies in the mid-1880s, just as what we now think of as modern consumer culture begins to take the forms that we recognise. And central to that is the concept of the brand. So that goods which previously were generic, for example, if you went to buy tea, the guy would have a big sack of tea and he'd scoop it up and he'd put it in a little bag and he'd take it away. No. Suddenly there's Lipton's tea, there's other people's tea, Coleman's mustard. Now the thing about these brands is that they're either named after the manufacturer, so they appear to be a gift from the manufacturer. It's Mr. Coleman who's brought you this mustard. Not all the guys who work for him, no, they're invisible. Or Lipton's tea, direct from the gardens. Some magical process. Suddenly these tea leaves come from India. Never mind the Opium War, never mind the colonization of India. They've come from these guys. Look at these nice people picking them. They've come to your table straight from the gardens. Now, what we now think of as consumerism has at its heart this notion that you should focus your attention solely on the object and project your attention forward to the moment when you will buy it, take it home and use it. You are instructed to forget where it came from, who made it, what the social costs might be, what the environmental costs might be. So that the whole commodity culture is a massive machine for amnesia. But more than that, you have to enter into it in an emotional way. You have to engage. You are encouraged literally to brand yourself, to become a lifelong user of the brand. Here's a guy who's branded the Lacoste logo on his chest. Think about where that notion of branding comes from. It's a badge of ownership. It's a badge of ownership for the company, but it's also a badge of ownership for you. Because in the culture we now inhabit, brands have become one of the primary ways we talk to each other about ourselves. What we choose to buy, what we choose to surround ourselves with, is a way of telling people who we are and how we wish them to see us. Try a little thought experiment for yourself. Imagine you go out tonight, you meet somebody, you think, they're nice. They say, would you like to come back to my flat for a coffee? You think, well, maybe, okay. So you get there, they say, I'll go and make the coffee. What do you do? I'll tell you what I do. I run round and I look at all the books. And I think, oh my God, they've got the collected works of Daniel Steele. Or I look at their record collection and I say, look, they've got Jimmy Buffett. And I